let's pivot to this other game, which was insane from almost start to finish. The very first play from scrimmage, right, was a pick six that, like, bounced off the hand of the receivers, then bounced off another defender, and then ends up in the arms of Ali Highsmith, who returns it for a touchdown. And it didn't get much less crazy from that point on.
You probably saw a little bit more of this one in live than I did, because, like I said, I was watching the Saints-Panthers one. But even from me following this game, it's wild. It would, like, people were ready to put Kenny Pickett in the USFL. Like, people were ready for this guy to never be in the NFL again. And it is kind of hilarious that he ended up getting the win. I understand that QB wins aren't a real thing. But when I look at this game and the results, the thing that does stand out to me is Cleveland's side of it. This is one of the best defenses in the NFL.
Yeah.
They gave their team a shot now to win over the last two games, right? They certainly did so against the Bengals when they won last week, and they did so again against the Steelers. I mean, they were absolutely locked down. They made some of their good players on offense look, again, like they didn't belong in the league. When you look at how Cleveland rushed the ball, Jerome Ford, he had a healthy yards per carry average. A lot of that came from that one big run. Nick Chubb obviously had a really good average before he ended up getting hurt.
Bruce. They
were able to move the ball on the ground. They were able to diversify where they threw the football. The thing was that just like Deshaun Watson's not it, man. And you and I have talked about this before. I don't know if that Houston version of Deshaun Watson exists anymore. And every week that it does not show up, it gets harder and harder to think that it's ever going to. Kevin Stefanski also is in a kind of interesting spot right now, because he was probably a big part of the reason why they bring in Watson, and they think that it's all going to work out. And here it's absolutely falling flat on their face. This is a football game that you absolutely should have won last night. I don't care if you're on the road. I don't care if it's a divisional game. I get that winning in the NFL is really hard. The Cleveland Browns should have won the game last night.
Yeah.
And they didn't because of Deshaun Watson. And now it's becoming a Kevin Stefanski problem, who, if you go to their records, 2020, Stefanski went 11-5. He won Coach of the Year that year, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
I think so.
I believe he won Coach of the Year that year. Then they go 8-9. Then they go 7-10 with the first year of Watson, and now they're sitting here at 1-1, and the quarterback position still feels like an unanswered question.
Yeah, Steve.
This is not good for Stefanski.
No, Steve sent me
some
numbers on Deshaun Watson. So Deshaun Watson with the Browns, PFF grade of 57.5. That's 35th out of 40 quarterbacks. PFF passing grade 54.9. So like 3 grading points worse. That's 36th out of 40. Big time throw rate 2.1%. That's 32nd. Turnover worthy play rate 3.6%. That's the 11th highest mark. And then a sack percentage of 9.7%. That's the 3rd highest in the NFL. That's pretty bad. And it's not getting dramatically better. Now, okay, if you want to put the optimistic spin on this game, as we did to start the show, both of these defenses I thought were very, very good. Like, you know, the Steelers defense played a lot better than it did week one. And it was causing a lot of problems as well. And this was a pretty difficult environment for the quarterbacks to look good in. But it wasn't a good game by Deshaun Watson. It was an abysmal game by Kenny Pickett. And, you know, after 2 weeks, okay, they got the win here. But, dude, that Kenny Pickett and that offense looks more like it did last year than it did during the preseason or training camp.
And Pickett was good towards the second half of last season.
Yeah.
Right? It was basically Pickett, Lawrence, and Burrow, who second half of the season were, like, on fire. Like, those three had some of the highest passing grades, if not the 3 highest passing grades that we had in the league over that stretch of time. And so it really looked like Kenny struggled early when he first became the starter, but then it was really starting to slow down for him, and he was really starting to see the game appropriately during the second half of the season. He looks great in the preseason, and regular season comes around. I get that it's a different animal, but Pickett's decision-making and accuracy are all over the place right now. Yeah. And I didn't think there was going to be this big of a regression. We talk about the sophomore slump all the time, like, oh, you know, it's something that you can plan for with some of these players. But, man, this kind of seems like a dub because it's the most important part of playing the position. But for Kenny Pickett especially, a player who isn't winning on overwhelming athleticism or arm talent, if your decision making and anticipation isn't pinpoint and your accuracy is not pinpoint, it's going to look like it has over the last 2 weeks. And that's obviously a major problem because for as much of a wizard as Mike Tomlin is, this team's not going to finish above 500 and compete for a playoff spot if Pickett can't look at these last 2 games and say, these are the worst 2 games of my season. And like that's kind of the level that we're talking about here. Those 2 games that we've seen from Kenny Pickett have to be the worst 2 games that he plays this year if this team is actually going to compete for a playoff spot.
And it's entirely possible that will happen. That's the nature of small sample sizes. But the decisions in this game were catastrophic. Like the interception to Delpit was ridiculous. It's sometimes, there are some of the young interceptions that guys like Bryce Young or whatever have made in the first couple of weeks of the season. It's about, learning what NFL players can do relative to college players or, learning the speed of the game and all these kinds of things. Then there are decisions where it's like, this wasn't disguised, this wasn't anything complicated. You just completely misread what you were looking at. Like, there's a guy sitting there right where you want to throw the slant into, and all you need to do is to check that he doesn't move in the direction of your slant before you throw the ball. Like, you're looking at it anyway. You just need to make sure that guy isn't already bearing down on it by the time you throw that ball. And instead he throws the ball right to Grant Delpit. And then the second turnover-worthy play, which was lucky not to end up in a turnover, I don't even know why he's attempting that pass. Like, he's running out towards the sideline and instead tries to throw it like around a defender. Like, his receiver has to go all the way around the back of him and come back towards the center of the field in order to make that anything other than a catastrophic mistake in a game that was close. Like, again, sometimes you can understand forcing it like that if you're, in a hole, you've got a couple of touchdowns to try and pull back and you need to make something happen that isn't necessarily there. But this was I think they were up at this point in the game. Like, don't make that mistake. That's ridiculous. Like, this is the kind of mistake that he should not be making in year 2. Maybe as a rookie, fine, rookies make those kinds of mistakes. In year 2, you can't make errors like that. You should know better by this point, and he doesn't seem to have. It looked like he did in preseason, and now he's gone back.
Well, again, I don't want to get away from the fact that I think we, as a society, do have a bad tendency to think that players can't have bad games. And we continue that to think that, okay, players can't have 2 bad games. Like, if you have 2 bad games,
right,
like, you're a bum. And especially at the quarterback position, it just doesn't necessarily work like that. Even some of the best in the world have some bad games back to back. I feel like some at the very top, the Patrick Mahomes, certainly like when Tom Brady was going off, those guys, like, they kind of ruin it for everybody else. But the truth is that, like, you're allowed to have bad games. But that does not get away from what I said earlier, where these have to be the worst games of Kenny Pickett's season. Because if they want to be a playoff team, that's not playoff football. So even though what we've seen over the last 2 weeks, it happens, like, it's a reality. This game is really hard. It moves really fast. There's a lot of decisions that you have to make in split-second time. And there are times when even some of the best ones just make boneheaded decisions. It's the consistency of the boneheaded decisions that really start to get you in trouble. And once you start getting past, like, okay, you've had a couple of games where you weren't your best, do those tendencies start to become who you are as a quarterback? And I think that's obviously what you don't want to have with Pickett. So it's just got to be no other way around it. It's got to be a lot better than what it was last night, especially in a really, really tough AFC and maybe the toughest division in football.
One of the fascinating things in this game was rookie offensive tackle DeJuan Jones going up against TJ Watt as his first start. He got a ton of playing time last week because Jack Conklin went down so early, but this was his first real start at right tackle, and an absolute baptism of fire going up against one of the best defensive players in the entire NFL. I was really impressed by how he held up. I mean, sure, there's some losses in there, but when you consider the length of time, like the overall body of work, I mean, we're going to charge him for 4 pressures. One of them is a mental mistake where he blocks down on TJ Watt rather than fanning out and picking up the blitzer. To be honest, if you're going to err in that direction, that's not I would rather you made the mistake of blocking TJ Watt than, something else. Though that's not the worst thing in the world. Another one was kind of losing it on a stun, and then 2 relatively clean losses against TJ Watt. But, that's a hell of a lot better than Colton McKivitz did last week for the 49ers. That's not a bad debut for DeJuan Jones.
No, and DeJuan Jones, talent was never the issue with DeJuan Jones, and people look at him and go, like, how in the world did he fall towards the 4th round? Draft process means a lot, and keeping up with the draft process means a lot. And we try to keep tabs on it as much as possible to let people know kind of what's going on and how it could change the draft and how it could change the outlook. I really do wonder if what happened at the Senior Bowl is the reason why he fell all the way to the 4th round, right? Yeah. He absolutely dominates day 1 of the Senior Bowl, but Senior Bowl practices are 3 days. Senior Bowl week is three days of practice, and then you got a game a couple of days later. DeJuan Jones dominated, was absolutely the best player on the field on day 1. And then he didn't play the rest of the week. And he was like, nope, I'm done. I'm out of here. And I wonder if NFL teams, coaches, whatever, looked at that and was like, damn, this is somebody who's not going to stay and compete for all 3 days. Because that's really all I've got. Like, unless he tanked a bunch of the interviews, which I didn't really hear any of that. Like, I just wonder if something like that weighed so much in the mind of these guys. And some people out there who listen to this might think that is crazy that you would let that influence you. But if NFL teams and coaching staffs and scouting staffs don't think you're a competitor, they're not going to draft you. The NFL draft is too much of a crapshoot to take a player that you don't think is a competitor. Yeah. Even somebody who was as talented at Ohio State and is physically gifted as DeJuan Jones is. So I think Cleveland obviously got a steal in the 4th round with him. And to me, that's about the only explanation I have that a guy like that could slip to the 4th round.